It's the week ending Friday the 4th of April, and this is the Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the death toll from an earthquake in Myanmar reaching almost 3,000 people. Donald Trump imposing universal 10% tariffs on all imports to the US in what he's called America's Liberation Day, and the death of Batman and Top Gun star Val Kilmer at the age of 65. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in the Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Arian McNichol. Let's unwrap the week. And with Ollie away for 3 weeks on an extended Disney World visit, I believe, joining me this week from the Week's digital team, it's Rebecca Messina, Felicity Capon, senior editor at the Week Junior magazine, and we welcome back former political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Vincent Moss. And Vincent, if Trump's trade war makes importing stuff from the US prohibitively expensive, what one American product are you going to miss most?
Well, I think apart from my MacBook and my iPhone, it'd have to be the telly. The Wire, The Sopranos, BoJack Horseman, Parks and Recreation, the US version of The Office, all of that. I'd really miss the TV.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to base my entire understanding of your whole personality on that one comment, given that we've just met. Felicity, what are you going to miss most?
Whiskey.
Also judgments. And Rebecca?
I'm just sad I may never get the chance to finally check out those American candy shops.
Yeah, right. Well, for me, it's Harley Davidson's and Reese's Pieces, obviously. You can all make of that what you want. But Felicity, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
I think it will be remembered for something miraculous. Probably the first teenage boy ever to be described as a saint.
Carlo was a special young boy. He had an ordinary life, like most of everybody, but he opened the door of his heart to Jesus, and his ordinary life became extraordinary.
A snippet from a trailer for the film The Boy from Milan posted on YouTube channel Formed on Sunday. Felicity, what's the story?
The story is the Augustine Institute, which is a big US graduate school of theology, has released a documentary this week about the life of a young boy, Carlo Acutis, who is nearly at the end of his journey to become canonized by the Catholic Church and thus to be a saint. He died in 2006, age 15, but that's what's so interesting about and what's such a big part of his appeal is that he's being described as the first millennial saint because of his youth, basically. And meanwhile, in Assisi, so that's where his body has been laid to rest, and it's part of a shrine that you can go and visit. And if you look at the pictures on the internet, they're quite surreal and weird in a way, because he's sort of laid out, he's wearing a tracksuit and sneakers, and you can see his whole body through a panel of glass. But apparently, according to the bishop there, over the last year, 1 million pilgrims have made their way to his shrine, and the momentum is growing ahead of the final stage of his journey to become a saint.
Yeah, I saw that footage of how he has been laid in state almost, and the way they've preserved him as well. He's encased in wax, I believe, and he's wearing jeans and sneakers, as you say. Is that all part of the attraction? Like, is that what people are coming to see?
I think so. I think a lot of people are talking about how ordinary he was, and also the fact that he's so relevant. He's lived in our time, and the idea that anyone can become holy. I mean, not anyone, but in theory, you know, it's not saints from centuries ago, or, you know, we're talking about this ordinary boy. He loved football, he loved gaming, he made lots of videos about Eucharistic miracles and spread these among people. And people are talking about, you know, they seem to have really been taken by the idea of just an ordinary boy who went about his life in an ordinary way, but was, you know, wanted to spread the word of Jesus and wanted to encourage more people to turn to a life of faith.
Yeah. I mean, Vincent, a kid who likes football and video games doesn't sound like a natural contender for beatification and canonization. How do you actually become a saint, and what's the process from this point for Carlo to become one?
Well, it's a fascinating process. It almost like looks as though there's a sort of a 5-step to being saint, if you like. I mean, first of all, obviously, you have to die, and ideally there should be a wait, and that's why this case is so unusual, because many figures have to wait years and years. So there's usually a wait of at least 5 years or so. Then you become, as I understand it, a servant of God, and your story is looked at to see whether you're suitable, and then you have to show a life of heroic virtue. And then I would have thought the hardest thing is basically there have to be sort of a couple of proven miracles, and then you're on the road to beatification and eventually canonization as a saint. So it's a long road.
And so presumably he's now several steps still from being a full saint. Has he done those miracles?
I think the miracles have been, as I understand it, recognised, and he's pretty much nearly there. I think he's at the point of beatification and pretty much on the road to being the first millennial saint.
Yeah, right. So, Rebecca, what does this mean for the Catholic Church? You know, the cynic in me might suggest, as a non-Catholic, that this could be a ploy to get younger people into the church. Is there anything to that, again, from a non-Catholic perspective?
I mean, yeah, that certainly plays a part. You know, as Vincent was saying, those miracles have been formally attributed to him. And I think as a non-believer, it's easy to be like, they have they? But, you know, it does go through a certain process. You know, the Vatican does consult doctors, scientists, etc., to make sure that there is at least, you know, some scientific consensus that there is no formal explanation for the miracles that have taken place. And actually, both of the miracles attributed to Carlo, the beneficiaries were both children. One was a 4-year-old who was healed after praying to Carlo when they were suffering from a pancreatic disease and came into contact with a piece of his clothing. The second one was a girl in Costa Rica who suffered a head trauma after she fell off her bike while she was in Florence, but she made this miraculous recovery after her mother prayed at Carlo's tomb, that shrine site that Felicity mentioned in Assisi. But I do think, yes, it's beneficial to the Catholic Church. It's beneficial in several ways. One is, of course, the fact that this is, you know, the first millennial saint, the idea that he is a relatable figure to young people today. And obviously the Catholic Church has a huge problem with reaching young people, particularly in the developed world, you know, particularly in Italy. You know, church attendance is falling drastically, especially among the young. And we're sort of seeing that repeated in countries around the world. But also the fact that it's hard to venerate somebody from recent times when it's easy to find out lots of information about people compared to, you know, that's one of the great things about the medieval saints. You know, we don't know that much about them. So it's very safe to venerate them. They're not going to come out with a sex scandal all over the newspapers. And that's something that's really valuable about Carlo Acutis as well, is that he died before he could do anything that would reflect poorly on the church. You know, I think there is something to be said, especially when the church is still massively rocked to the core in terms of its reputation around the world by all those child sex abuse scandals. There is something really valuable in having a saint who's not just relatable to young people, but who is a young person.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of what's captivating about his story, isn't it? That he was a young person who really found religion in a very personal and quite extreme way. You know, he took it upon himself to then start spreading the gospel himself. I mean, Felicity, are there hints that more young people are turning to Christianity like Carlo did?
Certainly, there are stories that he was able to reach his peers because he was very into the internet and he was very good at reaching people online. He's been likened to Francis of Assisi, St. Francis, which is why he requested on his death that he be moved there, because there were so many similarities to Francis, and he really looked up to him and wanted to emulate him, and he did, by all accounts. He gave money he came similar to St. Francis. He came from a very wealthy Italian family, but decided to give all that up, and he gave money to the poor, and he worked at soup kitchens and all that sort of thing. And I think more widely, the story really struck me, because I have this feeling that actually a lot of young people are looking to the church or to spirituality in general to help them find meaning in life. A lot of it is sort of anecdotal, but I feel there's lots of figures on podcasts at the moment talking about Christianity and conversions and how they're rediscovering Christianity. Someone who springs to mind is Adam Peaty, the Olympic swimmer, who last year was crediting his faith and his belief in God with how he copes, and a lot of his struggles with mental health and loneliness and the need to find a community. And I was really struck by that, because I just thought there's a real vibe shift that you're hearing people go on TV like Anna Peaty and sort of, you know, praising God for their accomplishments. I just think we're in a totally different place than we were in the 1990s, like leagues away from the new atheist movement of the 1990s, when there was a real repudiation of religion on intellectual grounds. Religion just wasn't cool. It wasn't cool to be a Chriso. And now you do have a lot of people talking about converting. There's this talking about young people being the open generation. They're very open to spirituality. I imagine a lot of that comes down to the pandemic, to living through crazy times and wanting to find some meaning and purpose in life.
Yeah, but even so, even though there may be some hints that things are going in that direction, the simple fact is that the stats suggest that religion and spirituality has still been broadly on the decline. So, is outreach, if you take this as a form of youth outreach, is it going to help stem the problems, or are the broader problems not just within Christianity, and certainly not just within the Catholic Church, but broadly? Are those problems going to go away, Vincent?
No, I don't think they are, but there's no doubt people are looking for something and looking for solutions. And I think where the relevance of Arcutis is so important is the fact that he was talking about things that really resonate with young people in terms of perhaps he was helping classmates whose parents were getting divorced, challenging bullies who were targeting disabled students, and donating meals to the homeless. And I think in an increasingly uncertain world where there's so many conflicts going on at the moment, young people feel disenfranchised in so many ways. They're looking for role models, and it may be something that does sort of turn the tide in some ways in a positive way.
Rebecca, Felicity mentioned earlier those parallels that have been drawn between Carlo and Francis of Assisi, but Francis had some truly radical ideas. He challenged the wealth and power of both the church and society in the 13th century. He saw nature as sacred. He preached peace in the era of crusades. Did Carlo have any big ideas of his own? How deep do those parallels go, do you think?
Well, there's definitely, as Felicity was saying, there's the comparison that they were both privileged young men from these wealthy backgrounds who sort of wanted to turn their backs on that background. But the difference, of course, obviously, is that Carlo died so young. There is a certain element of radicalism in the way that he harnessed the power of the internet to reach people. We're talking about, the early 2000s here. So it was still a relatively novel way to be spreading the word. He kind of got started in the computer programming for religion by making a website for his local church. And, that just goes to show the church itself was relying on the boy who was 13 or 14 at this time to build a website, because there really wasn't that infrastructure in place in the way that I would say, almost 20 years later there is now. Certainly much more outreach online. And I think that's one of the things actually that's driving, at least if not a revival of religion among young people at a large scale, at least a revival of its visibility. I think it comes back to this question of we talk a lot about the fragmentation of society and the end of the monoculture. And, like as Felicity was saying, in the 90s and the early 2000s, that monoculture definitely felt like it was moving in the direction of increased atheism, skepticism towards organized religion as a whole. But now, where you've got things like YouTube and TikTok, anyone can find a niche on there. There's Catholic TikTok, there's huge Muslim TikTok base as well. Through Ramadan, there have been people sharing memes and sort of just funny videos that have reached not just people within that religion, but people outside as well. And certainly I think with the dissolution of the monoculture, we've definitely been seeing a lot more subcultures, including religious ones, really finding a niche online and maybe making young people less, feel less shame or embarrassment to admit that they are religious and to talk about their faith with other young people. And I think Carlo was definitely at the frontier of that kind of movement.
So do you think, Felicity, technological outreach is going to be a part of the Catholic Church's future in particular? What does future growth for the Catholic Church look like at the moment?
It's hard to know, really, because the key thing about any big shifts or big trends in something like faith and religion is that they're bound to happen over decades. So if there is a revival or there is an increased decline, it would be hard. It's not going to happen, overnight. But I certainly thought it was relevant to mention that the Pope's memoirs were published in January this year, which was the first autobiography of a sitting Pope, which again seemed very notable in the sense of, has this been done because of his ailing health? Has it been done to justify some of the decisions he's made during his papacy? And obviously he's known as quite a reforming and liberal Pope, and that's caused a lot of warring factions among people who want to see the Catholic Church still committed to its older traditions, while the Pope has been seen to sort of push it forward, and certainly in terms of, his treatment of gay people. But what's interesting is that what you can see with Christian trends in Britain is that a lot of believers are actually more interested in what one Anglican priest has called a full fat version of faith. So actually more conservative versions of faith, and what you're seeing in evangelical churches or Pentecostal churches, or denominations offering more conservative expressions, those are actually growing, and young people are more interested in a really like full fat supernatural version of Christianity. So it's easy to say that, you know, the church needs to get more with the times and be more technological and be more modern. Actually, it might be that people want to go back to a really deeper conservative, deeper spiritual version of faith. It's just really interesting.
Well, as the potential patron saint of the internet, it's surely only a matter of time before we all get cancelled on this one, so we should probably move along quite quickly. Next up, could the next big novel be written by a robot? That's after this. Okay, Vincent, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This should be remembered as the week some of our best-known authors fired off a letter to the government in a battle to change the way their story ends.
It's money taken out of my pocket, and the pocket of all authors. And when you consider that the average income for an author in the UK is about £7,500 a year, it actually, every penny really matters. But also just a threat to this profession even being able to continue to exist. We are, I think, at genuine risk of not having any books for people to actually pirate, at least not written by humans.
Author Rowan Coleman speaking to Sky News on Sunday. Vincent, what's the story here?
Well, this is the week that a long list of authors, including Richard Osman, Val McDermott, wrote to Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, about something they could literally end their careers. They want the government to hold Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, to account over their use of copyrighted books, their books, to train its artificial intelligence robots on. And these authors are worried the work that's been included without their permission on this searchable database called Library Genesis, or LibGen, which has got more than 7.5 million books on it and 80 million research papers. And they're worried that this database is being used by the tech giants to train their bots on to write AI-generated books. And essentially, the real fear is that without action, these authors think they're looking at a future where all books are put together by AI and human creators, human writers, are effectively written out of their own stories.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit more about like the background of LibGen and also why we suspect that Meta might have accessed it?
Yeah, well, essentially, LibGen is this relatively new phenomenon, which is a kind of database. More than 7 million books are on there, usually without the author's permission. And this database is being used allegedly by tech giants to use all that research and information and fine writing to create new material potentially. And that is very alarming for those authors because they haven't given their permission and they fear that these pirated works, if you like, effectively will be used to create books and they won't be needed in future.
Rebecca, how valid do you think those fears are?
Just talking about the Meta case, so this letter from the Society of Authors comes after The Atlantic published a piece about this ongoing court case in the US between US-based authors and Meta. And The Atlantic published its own database where basically you can go in there and see what authors' works have potentially been pirated to train AI models. But the interesting thing is that it's not even allegedly. Internal Meta chats that have been submitted as part of this court case show that the employees were well aware of what they were doing. One quote from someone in the engineering team says, "The problem is that people don't realise if we license one single book, we won't be able to lean into fair use strategy." So and this is the legal defence that's being used by the likes of Meta and AI. They both claim that it's fair use to train generative AI on copyrighted work without a licence because their models transform that material into new work. There hasn't been a definitive ruling on this argument yet. I mean, it could arise from this court case in the US, but whatever happens, that's going to enormously influence the future of AI. But basically what they are saying is it would be too hard, too slow, too expensive to develop these models without ignoring copyright. So we'll just ignore them. You know, the entitlement is incredible and they are well aware of what they are doing. So it's kind of relevant, actually, what we've seen with LibGen as well in the past is that LibGen has been the subject of many court cases because obviously they are making this copyrighted work available for free to anyone who wants to torrent it. And judgments have been issued in the tens of millions against them, but they haven't been paid. They've just been ignored because the people who run it are anonymous. They are based, we don't know where they're based, but certainly doesn't seem like they're based in the US. So the courts just can't reach them. And I think we're going to see something quite similar with AI in that rulings are going to be made that X, Y, Z has to happen. But what we're seeing is that companies like Meta are very much willing to ignore legislation that doesn't work in their favor, and we haven't quite mastered reining them in yet, and it's difficult to see if that's going to be possible when the violations are happening at this scale.
Yeah, I mean, Felicity, do you think there's anything to that fair use argument, given exactly what Rebecca put out as that prospective use case that whoever it is, Stephen King's book gets picked up and then some user says, write me a book in the mode of Stephen King, and what AI spits out isn't a Stephen King book, it's just a new book that's sort of inspired by Stephen King. Is there something to that argument that they're not infringing copyright directly in the way that we understand it?
I think so. I mean, firstly, I think with AI, the genie is out of the bottle. So I sort of feel people can complain all they want, but we're already in it. It's not like this is the build up. We're already there. It's already happening. I do think there's a sort of, you've got to get with it or you're just going to get steamrolled by it. I do think the conversation around what constitutes fair use is probably going to have to change and be broadened in some ways. And I think, as you were saying, Arian, and what I was going to say is that the main thing in what we've been discussing so far is that it's not regurgitating the novel, it's creating something new. I can understand the uproar around it, certainly, but I do think that's a fair argument to have made. Whether what AI is producing is any good is another matter, but I sort of feel like if AI produced work isn't as good as something written or created by a human, then I don't think there's much to worry about. And if it is as good or it's going to be better, and AI is sort of shifting all the time and getting better all the time, so I'm sure it will get pretty good, then I sort of feel like that could be a win. I mean, why not have an AI Tolstoy who's with us and just have better works of fiction and music and all sorts? And certainly there are artists who have already come out and sort of been in favour of it. Daniel Bedingfield, anybody remember the Gotta Get Through This guy?
You're telling me that AI could write a better song than Gotta Get Through This?
Yeah.
Well, he's actually described the people who are sort of outraged by what's going on as neo-Luddites who are going to be left behind. And he's actually very scathing of the music industry as it is, and saying that actually a parallel system within music where you could be anybody you could be very young and you could not play a musical instrument, you might have a means of making excellent music. That might not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of sharks in the music industry right now. It can be very hard to break through. So yeah, maybe this is the future.
I think he's a minority voice. I mean, most people in the music industry, film industry, authors and others are really worried about this because while there are law cases going on in America, copyright's very simple in the UK. If you've written a book or created something, you've got copyright on it. And if people want to use that, they've got to ask you, and they've usually got to pay you. And if they don't do that, you won't have the authors and the writers and the musicians of the future, because it's already an incredibly precarious occupation if you're a filmmaker, musician or author. And if AI is just going to be allowed, the tech giants, already billionaire companies, are going to be allowed to gobble up all these works for free. And we're not talking about assistive AI, which is a good thing potentially and can be used as a tool to make things better. We're talking about generative AI here, where they effectively steal works that other people have slaved over and put out something that they claim is new, but isn't really new at all. It's just an amalgamation of somebody else's work. And I think many people feel that's unfair. And you can understand, I think, the trepidation of these authors who just think these giant global, largely US-based tech companies are going to steal their work for free and without permission.
Yeah, and I don't understand the fair use argument really from a legal perspective at all, especially the grounds that they're creating new work. Because if I want to write a history book and I go and borrow loads of other history books from the library or buy them in a shop, I have to do that in order to do my research. I can't just steal the books because I'm going to make something new with them. And similarly, if I'm making a film and I'm inspired by other filmmakers, that doesn't mean I can just torrent their movies online so I can watch them and get inspiration for my thing. I don't understand the fair use argument from that perspective whatsoever.
Vincent, I detected a certain amount of passion in your response just then, and I know that there's one other fact I know about you, apart from that you like American TV, which is that you work for UK Music, which, as I understand it, represents the collective interests of the UK's commercial music industry. I mean, is this a problem that you have, that you're talking to people about and that you feel particularly keenly?
Yeah, that's right, because I think we all see the good side of AI. We can see its uses in medicine and various other things. But there's a worry that certainly at the moment the government wants to attract, and this is a good thing as well, AI to the UK. But there are fears about what it means for the creative industries that are worth combined 125 billion to the country, and what it means for human creators. And people are worried about that. I think when Felicity talks about the term fair use, that's generally been used in the sense that you can clip a bit of audio or something, or you can clip an interview, a section of an interview, when you're talking about news, because you need to do that to show what the Prime Minister or what Putin or what Trump has said. So that's fair use when you're taking a clip potentially from the BBC or elsewhere to highlight something. But to effectively sort of steal or pirate a whole book or a whole piece of work to sort of make profit for yourself without seeking to reward that person who's slaved over it, people generally accept a sense of fair play, and I don't think they think that these AI tech giants are playing fair when it comes to copyright.
So, Felicity, do you think that the government shares that sense of the common person of fair play on this one? You know, is the government likely to respond and intervene in some way that's positive? And also, what can they actually do? Won't any government intervention from this point simply be shutting the stable door after the horses bolted, considering so many AI algorithms have already been trained by so much very likely copyrighted material already?
Yeah, I think the government is jumping on the bandwagon, probably a bit too late. But it's very key. It's very key to be seen to be pro AI, and it's very keen to support anything that's going to give them this growth, which they bang on about growth all the time. And I think it's all quite superficial, really. I don't really trust that this government really has any idea what to do with the economy and how to kickstart growth. But in terms of making the UK an attractive place for AI companies to come to with, you know, tax breaks and the likes, whether the kind of uproar, I mean, there's been like so many artists and musicians and really big names sort of writing letters and protesting, and whether that's going to do anything, I don't know. I imagine there'll be a bit of parliamentary ping pong between the Commons and the Lords as they try and figure everything out. But I still go back to my original point that the genie is out of the bottle. And even though I don't really trust that this government will know what to do with it, I do think we sort of have to adapt to a world where AI is already with us. Technological revolutions are always very unsettling at first, but they've happened throughout history, that industries have always had to deal with rising automation. I mean, even looking at self-service tills in shops or robotics in car manufacturing, and this fear that technology is going to replace our jobs. There's always an initial burst of turbulence, but eventually I think we will find a way of living with it. I think we will find a new way that jobs are created through it. I don't think it's all doom and gloom, and you just can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Rebecca, picking up on that, I know there's a certain first they came for the writers and I said nothing aspect to what I'm about to ask, and podcasters are definitely in AI's firing line as well. But if humans like consuming work made by AI as much or more than they like that's made by other humans, then shouldn't we just let it rip? You know, if readers are being deprived of the magnificent work of AI geniuses, then aren't we impoverishing ourselves? I guess I'm saying, who's more important, the consumer or the creator?
Well, the dangers of AI-generated work aren't just to the author's ego or wallet, because one way that AI-generated books are already disrupting the market is in non-fiction. I don't know if you saw, there was a case of an amateur mushroom forager who was poisoned after consulting a mushroom handbook generated by AI. Less dangerously, but still relevant. We have loads of examples of nonsensical recipes from AI cookbooks. You know, these no effort non-fiction products are already flooding the market. You know, if you just have a browse through Amazon, it's really obvious that a lot of the recent nonfiction work on there has been generated by AI. But I think the idea of seamless AI fiction is still quite far off. I don't know if you saw Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, recently teased a forthcoming model, which he claimed was capable of writing really good creative fiction. And to prove his point, he shared a short story generated by the prompt, write a metafictional literary short story about AI and grief. And having read that myself, I would say AI fiction is maybe approaching the standard of my teenage fan fiction, particularly the phrase, "She lost him on a Thursday, that liminal day that tastes of almost Friday." I sent chills through my body because I was like, I could have written this when I was 15.
Yeah, but you were probably quite a good writer when you were 15, Rebecca.
But so what's the problem then? If AI is this bad and there are so many brilliant examples of how silly and nonsensical it is, what do we have to be worried about?
Well, it's not comparable to human writing, but that's not really a reflection on its quality from a strictly literary standpoint. I have definitely seen published books with crappier prose than that, but it is a lifeless facsimile of a literary style, so that's not to say it's not technically impressive. A few years ago it would have blown my mind to see that AI could create this short story that Sam Altman shared, but and I don't want to minimize that, but it's not the same as human writing. It lacks that idiosyncrasy of the human hand. But if it turns out that consumers don't really care about that, is this something that only people with, sort of pretensions of literary understanding care about? We'll see. If I do think AI, within probably months, if not years, will be capable of producing something that we might be happy to read by the side of a swimming pool on holiday.
Felicity, for the tortured among us who still think that we have something to contribute that's different to AI, is there any way that authors and creators can protect themselves from future copyright infringement of the kind that we're talking about? And for that matter, regular users of meta products, given everything we post on Instagram can be hoovered up by AI bots these days. Is there a way that creatives can protect themselves?
I think they just have to be better. You've got to be better than AI. You laugh, but from the conversation we've been having so far, it doesn't really sound that AI at the moment can do what a literary great can do. So it doesn't sound that alarming to me. I feel like there must be a way that it can work alongside AI, where creatives can work alongside AI. And maybe there are lots more people who will be able to break into creative industries because of AI that couldn't previously. I'm not sure that AI could write, a great film like Oppenheimer. It could probably write the next Marvel sequel because they're quite formulaic. But at the moment, I think for the very, very greatest works of art, I don't think AI could come anywhere near them for now.
I would just say that I think it's important for the soul that we get to enjoy the work of human creators. I may be old-fashioned in that respect, but I think it's really, really important that stories are told by humans to other humans. Otherwise, we become a rather bereft, soulless planet, potentially.
Well, my AI-powered script bot has certainly run out of questions on that topic, leaving me a bit more soulless. So up next, will Wile E. Coyote finally have his day in court? That's after this. Rebecca, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Well, this was the week that Wile E. Coyote finally got a break.
Yes, probably one of the most highest anticipated, fully cancelled movies that were completely complete has finally been revived. Saved from the greed-ridden, tax-saving shelves of Warner Brothers. Suck it, David Zaslav.
Daz Reviews getting excited on Tuesday in the video, "Wow, Coyote versus Acme is back!" ! Seriously! ! Rebecca, what's the story here?
So the story is that this week a deal was finalised which is going to see Warner Brothers sell the film Coyote versus Acme, which was made in 2023, but we'll through a process we'll get to, has been on the shelf since then. It's been sold now to Catch Up Entertainment, which is a distributor. They paid a reported $50 million for rights to distribute the film. In case you're interested, it's a comedy. It's a live-action animation hybrid about Wile E. Coyote, the famous pursuer of Roadrunner, suing Acme, the company that makes all of the gadgets with which he fails to catch Roadrunner. The premise is based on a humour article that's published in The New Yorker, as well as the Coyote himself. It stars SNL alumnus Will Forte as his lawyer and John Cena as the CEO of Acme. It sounds like harmless fun, and people who had seen internal screenings said that it was really entertaining. It tested positively with test audiences, but Warner Brothers decided not to release it.
So people liked it, but they didn't want to put it out. What happened there?
Well, apparently Warner Brothers had initially tried to sell it on with a price tag of around $17 million. They'd spent $72 million making it, but they decided instead, after not apparently getting their asking price, to shelve it and write it off as a loss for tax purposes. This was in late 2023. This was met with a lot of dismay and outrage, not least from the people who worked on it. Will Forte called it fucking bullshit. Brian Duffield, who's a writer and producer, he's known for Cocaine Bear, if you enjoyed that classic on Netflix. He claimed he had seen the movie and that it was excellent, and he tweeted, "The people working at Warner Brothers are anti-art, and I hope multiple anvils drop on their heads." And to put it very simply, why the studio decided to do this. So studio has its ledger of income and expenditure. So they take, say, $72 million from their cash assets and they pay to make or buy Coyote versus Acme. That money is then converted into another asset, which is the movie itself. However, if they shelve that project altogether, that movie is now worth $0 to the studio. So that money that you invested in it was a loss, and therefore you can deduct it from your tax burden. In this case, Warner was estimated to have saved $30 million from its taxable income. So you might be thinking, well, if you've already spent the $72 million, why not just release the movie and try and make some of it back? That really boils down to the marketing and distribution costs. These typically run into the tens of millions. You've got to fund a huge publicity machine. And if you're, this is a reputational necessity too. If you're Warner Brothers, you can't just drop a movie with no fanfare and save your publicity budget. You have to put the marketing money into it. A share of the profits also goes to the cinemas who are showing the movie, and sometimes the stars get a percentage too. So to be worthwhile, the ballpark figure is that a film should make at least twice its production cost to cover those additional expenses and then also have a decent profit margin into the bargain. And if that's not possible, whether the movie just sucks or whether there are legal issues that could cause problems for the studio, or sometimes just a change in ownership or a change in corporate strategy, the studio sometimes crunches the numbers and decides that the tax write-off is more valuable to them than what they would stand to make from the release. And to be clear, they are still losing money overall. They've just calculated that this is the way for them to lose the least money.
I mean, what's weird about this particular case, though, is it sounds like they've got a good movie on their hands. And yet, Vincent, this isn't the first time that a movie has been shelved for this exact reason, pretty much. How often does this happen?
Probably more often than we know. That there are lots of these movies in this sort of digital purgatory. I think there was Batgirl, which cost about $90 million. And that didn't come out, and there have been others as well. So there could be a huge number of them. And you can understand why studios don't want bad movies from their point of view released for reputational purposes. But it means that a lot of fans are denied potentially very exciting films. And I think that there'll be, the more we know about these things, there'll be pressure potentially from some fans of some films, especially the franchises that are so popular, to get some of these unscreened potential gems out there and out in the cinemas.
Yeah, Felicity, why do you think this is happening? I mean, this isn't the only expensive film to fizzle at the moment. You have The Electric State, Snow White. What's going on in Hollywood just now? And arguably, would some of those films have been better left as tax write-offs?
So Hollywood is in a bad way, really. There was a mantra in the industry at the end of the last year, which was survive till 25, which was hoping that this year things would get easier and better. Instead, obviously, the wildfires greeted the industry in January and were absolutely devastating for a number of reasons. Premieres and award ceremonies were scrapped. Big decisions had to be postponed or scrapped. And then you also had COVID, obviously, which led to lengthy shutdowns and severe financial damage. And of course, the biggest strike in 4 decades amongst actors and writers in 2023, which led to an extended shutdown. Compounding all of that was a broader economic downturn, which has seen major streaming companies and broadcasters cut back commissioning. So all of this has kind of meant that the industry is in a bad way. And so I think they are having to think more strategically about the bottom line, basically, and about what's making money and what's not. I mean, it still doesn't make it right. I think it's absolutely galling if you have spent years working on a project and put your heart and soul into it, and for it just to be shelved. But sorry, I don't defend the Hollywood studios, but I certainly think that that's what's going on. But I mean, whether it's good for business to shelve films is another question, because there's been a huge backlash to what they've done with this film. Not only did it sound like it's actually a good film, which as you were alluding to, Arian, there are a lot of huge blockbusters at the moment which have been, panned, like Snow White or The Electric State or the Lord of the Rings stuff on Amazon. So not only it was a good film, but it was a whole film. I mean, the other one that you mentioned, Batgirl, that was axed during post-production. This was actually a completed film. It just feels wrong, really, about what they've done. But such was the backlash, and it was sort of trending on Twitter for weeks, I believe, that maybe this means that fans have the power to turn things around.
Given that backlash, Rebecca, do you think there's the possibility that we're all being played here? Is this some kind of mega 4D chess maneuver to generate fan outcry and press interest before a big release next year?
I wish it did. I think it really does speak to the precariousness of the business as a whole. I mean, this is the thing. I like the idea of it being a marketing stunt, but at the end of the day, Warner Brothers would rather have a hit. Movie studios would rather have a hit than have a canned film and a tax write-off to the tune of however many $1 million. They would rather that it was a box office smash instead. And in this case, they've sold it on to Catch Up Entertainment for about $20 million, if the figures reported in Deadline are correct, about $20 million less than what they paid to make it in the first place. So this is still not a good story, and the publicity around it is obviously not good for Warner Brothers either. And this isn't a new practice, I should say. Back in 1933, Charlie Chaplin burned the negatives of an unreleased silent film that had been made by his production company called A Woman of the Sea in front of 5 witnesses in order to then write it off for tax reasons. This has been going on in Hollywood for a long time, but as Vincent was alluding to, it's harder these days to kind of hide these stories, and it's easy for campaigns to pick up on social media saying, release the film, which in some cases like this, it is going to be released. Coyote vs. Acme is going to be released, but in some cases it can't be, and that's because the studios have insurance on some of these films. So in some cases, films are scrapped. The insurance is then claimed back because they couldn't be released, but that does mean obviously that then those films can never be released because that would be insurance fraud. But there have been, this is happening in so many different ways, not just in these films that are being written off for tax purposes, but also we've seen examples of studios deleting their own property, TV shows and movies from their streaming services. And that gets into something else, which is that the business, as we've been talking about, it is precarious at the moment. And there was a time when movie studios and TV networks could hope to recoup their costs in the long term from revenue streams like video and DVD sales or syndication, broadcast rights on TV, that either don't exist anymore or have changed radically. That and of course like the downfall of mid-budget movies. That means that every project is now kind of a big risk. And so, it's a complicated landscape. Famously, HBO Max, which is owned by Warner Brothers, removed Westworld from the HBO Max streaming platform. And what they did then, this caused a lot of fan backlash, but then they sold the rights to Roku and Tubi, which are free-to-air, ad-supported digital TV channels. And the reason for that is that Warner Brothers, which owns the rights to Westworld, which made Westworld, they make more money by doing that than by hosting it on their own streaming service, because they have to pay residual rates to the cast and crew. But the residuals are lower for free-to-air TV channels than they are for on-demand streaming platforms. Plus, they also then that way they get licensing fees from Roku and Tubi to show Westworld on their services. So it's such a complicated landscape. And from an outside perspective, it often feels like it makes absolutely no sense. This is the phrase Hollywood accounting. But it does really speak to the way that studios are having to scrabble and move money around and, move figures around in order to, keep themselves afloat.
But I do wonder whether that's exactly it, that, that feeling of this decision not making sense because there's this fully complete film out there. It feels tantalizing. It's sort of frustrating to know that there's a finished product, but we can't see it. It's like the cinematic version of that one-of-a-kind Wu-Tang album that most of us will never get to hear. I mean, Vincent, is there a threat that when this film finally comes out with all this anticipation, we're just all going to be massively underwhelmed?
Well, there's always a risk, isn't it, when there's a lot of shenanigans and publicity of this sort, that we might be disappointed. But I can't wait, really, because I'd always thought with Wile E. Coyote and those sort of films that they'd almost stopped because of the amount of violence in them. I used to love the original Wile E. Coyotes, but I thought a bit like Tom and Jerry that it had been consigned to the sort of wherever old celluloid goes, because they were too violent. So I'm for one, I'm very much looking forward to seeing it.
Well, at risk of this whole show being shelved as a tax write-off due to running over time and budget, that's going to have to be it for today. My thanks to Rebecca, Felicity and Vincent. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and then tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Arian McNichol. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer, Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.